I wasn't supposed to be here. My cousin had texted me, a casual stop by, need a hand with some stuff. And I thought, sure, easy enough. I thought it would be boring, routine, just boxes, a little organizing. But I didn't count on her being there. She was leaning against the doorway, arms crossed, watching me shuffle a pile of papers. She didn't need to say anything. Just the way she stood, quiet confidence in the curve of her hips, the tilt of her chin, made me suddenly aware of the heat in my palms. She wasn't young, not the kind you expect in a bookstore, or a repair shop, or wherever this was supposed to be mundane. She carried herself like someone who had seen things, done things, and didn't apologize for any of it. Need a hand? I asked, trying to sound casual, but my voice caught a little on the last word. She raised an eyebrow, just slightly, not mocking, not challenging, just assessing. Her lips quirked in the kind of half-smile that makes your stomach both knot and flutter. You could, she said softly, or you could just keep making a mess. Her tone wasn't mean. It wasn't teasing either. It was layered, like there was more beneath it, some unspoken current. I realized I wanted to know what she thought about everything. Not just the papers, not just the mess, but the little hesitation in her voice, the way her eyes tracked my movements. I handed her a stack of folders, fumbling slightly, because suddenly my hands were too aware of her proximity. She didn't reach out to correct me, didn't snap or scold. Instead, she took them with a small, graceful motion, fingers brushing mine for the briefest instant. A spark, or maybe a jolt, ran through me, and I had to force myself to look at something else. Anything else. We worked in silence after that, and it was loud. The soft hum of the fluorescent lights, the shuffle of papers, the faint creak of the floorboards under her shoes. It all felt like background music for something fragile and intense. Every glance she shot me seemed deliberate, and then almost immediately withdrawn, as if she had to remind herself to pull back. At one point, she paused, looking down at the mess, then at me. You always look like you're trying too hard, she said, but not unkindly. Just observing. Her voice had that texture that sticks with you, even when she's quiet, even when she's not saying anything important. I found myself smiling awkwardly, trying to mask the sudden awareness that I was probably blushing. Then, just before she walked away, she bent to pick up a stray envelope, and I caught the small detail. The scent of her perfume, warm, subtle, the way her hair slipped just slightly over her shoulder. She didn't glance back, didn't give me any reason to notice, and yet I couldn't stop noticing. I kept thinking about that tiny flicker of attention, the way she moved, the way she made a simple gesture, like picking up an envelope, feel weighted with significance. I told myself it was nothing, just a coincidence. I was just talking to my cousin. But the memory of her glance, the briefest touch of her fingers, it stayed with me long after I left the room. And I knew. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I didn't plan on seeing her again so soon. My cousin had a few more things that needed organizing, and I walked into the same cramped room with that same low hum of fluorescent lights. But there she was, seated on a folding chair, sorting through receipts, a mug of coffee untouched at her side. She didn't look up when I entered. That was normal, I told myself. She had this way of letting the world come to her at her own pace, guarded, distant, but I could see the subtle things she couldn't hide. The way her fingers trembled just a little as she held a pen, the faint crease of tension in her brow. I knelt to help her with a stack of manuals, careful not to brush her shoulder. You've been at this a while, I said softly, trying to fill the silence without intruding. She looked up then, eyes briefly meeting mine, sharp but tired. I can handle it, she said, not harshly, just precise. And in that one sentence, I felt a crack, just small enough to see that she wasn't completely unshakable. I handed her another folder, and as she took it, I noticed how delicate her hands looked, the way her nails caught the overhead light. Her laugh came then, quiet, almost shy, as she commented on some absurdity in the receipts. It was a sound I could have listened to for hours, soft, but with an edge that hinted at hidden amusement. We worked side by side, moving boxes, sorting paperwork. Every now and then, she'd pause, lean back, and rub her eyes. a small sigh would escape, almost unintentional, and I caught myself wanting to reach out, wanting to brush that tension away, but of course I didn't. I couldn't. There was a strange rhythm between us, one I didn't know how to name. I spoke less, watched more. The tilt of her head when she concentrated, the faint lines around her eyes that appeared when she frowned, the way she held her coffee cup with both hands as if bracing herself against the day, they all spoke more than words ever could. At one point, she stopped completely, looked at me, and for a heartbeat, something fragile passed between us. Not a smile, not a question, just hesitation. She seemed to weigh whether to say something, or perhaps just whether to let me see. And then she blinked, and it was gone, replaced by the same composed exterior she always carried. I realized I was leaning in slightly, just to catch that quiet energy, that moment of openness before she pulled the curtain back down. My heart thumped in a way that felt dangerous, thrilling, and entirely impossible to explain. She handed me a stack of papers, fingers brushing mine ever so slightly. I didn't pull away. I couldn't. And in that brief touch, fleeting and innocent by all appearances, I felt the gentle pull of something forbidden, something neither of us would name, but both of us were suddenly aware of. I stepped back, pretending to adjust the boxes, but my eyes lingered on her. And I knew, somehow, that I wouldn't be able to stop noticing her. Every tired glance, every small laugh, every unguarded moment she let slip, long after I walked out the door. The office was almost empty when I stayed behind to help her with the last of the inventory. Outside, the rain tapped steadily against the windows, soft at first, then heavier, thrumming against the glass like it wanted to remind us we weren't alone. She moved through the space with calm efficiency, but there was a subtle tension in her shoulders, the kind you carry when you're aware of someone watching, not just watching, but noticing. I carried a box of supplies, and when I set it down near her desk, she glanced up, just for a second, and I caught her eyes before she could look away. That pause, it lingered longer than it should have, and I realized my heartbeat had sped up. I wanted to say something, anything, but my voice felt like it would betray me. "Could you, maybe hold this for a second?" she asked, barely above a whisper, handing me a stack of folders. Our hands brushed, and the shock of contact stayed with me far longer than it needed to. She didn't pull away either, just let her fingers linger near mine, like she was testing a boundary she didn't intend to cross. For a moment, the world shrank to that tiny shared space, the sound of rain, the rustle of papers, the way her hair fell over her face when she tilted her head down. I could see the faint shadow of fatigue under her eyes, the tight line of her lips as if she were holding something back. I wanted to ask what it was, but even in my mind, I hesitated. Then her phone buzzed on the desk, a name flashing that made her body stiffen. She glanced at it and frowned, a fleeting look that said something about a life outside this room. She silenced it quickly, a sigh escaping her lips as she returned to the folders. The spell broke, and suddenly we were just two people, standing too close, trying not to acknowledge it. I found myself adjusting a stack of papers just to give her space. But even then, the tension remained, a subtle hum in the air. My mind ran through every possibility. What if I reached out? What if I said something that made her laugh, or cry, or lean closer? And then guilt and caution and the impossibility of the situation settled over me like a weight. At one point, she leaned over the desk to read a label, and I had to step back slightly, though my chest wanted to move closer. The scent of her shampoo, subtle but distinct, drifted past me. My fingers twitched as if they knew a line I didn't dare cross. We worked in near silence after that, exchanging small glances, smiles that didn't quite meet their mark. And just as the clock ticked past the hour, she stood, stretching, a soft exhale escaping her lips. My pulse was still racing. Then, as if the universe sensed the moment, she bent to pick up a pen I had dropped. Our hands brushed again, longer this time, and for one heart-stopping second, I thought maybe she would notice what I couldn't say aloud. But the moment broke before it could become anything, and I stepped back, pretending to adjust a chair. My heart was still thundering, and I knew I would replay that tiny collision, that brief, forbidden closeness, over and over, long after the office lights went out. We ended up in the small break room, both of us reaching for coffee at the same time. Our hands collided over the mug, and neither of us pulled away right away. The silence stretched, heavy, almost unbearable. What are we doing?" I said finally, the words sounding clumsy even to me. My throat was dry, my chest tight. Not a flirtation, not a confession, just honesty, raw and jagged. She froze, fingers hovering over her own mug. For a moment, she didn't answer. I could see her inhale slowly, her eyes drifting toward the window where the light had begun to fade, the rain painting streaks across the glass. She looked older, yes, but more fragile than I had noticed, like she was balancing something too heavy for her shoulders. "I don't know," she said at last, voice soft, almost a whisper, like she feared saying it too loudly would make it real. I thought I did." I swallowed. Her gaze met mine, and for a heartbeat, it was just two people standing on opposite sides of a line neither of us wanted to cross. But somehow, we were standing there anyway. I noticed the way her hand twitched as she set the mug down, the slight shake of her wrist, the tension in her jaw. I wanted to reach out. I wanted to say something that would ease it, but what could I say? Every word felt inadequate, too much, or too little. I kept my hands still, letting the space between us speak for me. She looked at me then, really looked, and there was something in her eyes I hadn't seen before. Fear, maybe, or shame, or longing? I couldn't tell, but it made me ache in a way I hadn't expected. "We can't pretend this is normal," she said finally, and her voice cracked just slightly at the end. "Not between us. Not anymore." I nodded, though it didn't make anything better. The room felt smaller, tighter, as if the air itself had thickened. I wanted to tell her it would be fine, that we could ignore it, but even saying it in my head felt like a lie. For several long moments, we just stood there, letting the silence stretch around us, letting it settle like dust. Every tick of the clock on the wall sounded loud. Every distant honk from the street outside sounded urgent. And all the while, her presence filled the room, undeniable, heavy, impossible to ignore. Finally, she turned away, staring at the fading light through the window. Her shoulders were tense, rigid, but the small exhale she let out betrayed something fragile beneath the armor. I can't do this," she murmured, almost to herself. "Not like this. Not with everything we're pretending isn't here." I didn't answer. I couldn't. My hands remained at my sides, my chest tight, my mind spinning with every what if I didn't dare voice. She didn't look at me again. She just let the words hang between us, heavy and unresolved, and I knew they were going to stay with me, echoing long after the lights went out. I came back to help her sort through an old box she'd found in the corner of her apartment. A box she said wasn't important, but that smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. She sat on the floor, legs folded under her, flipping through the contents with deliberate care, her face calm but distant. "Why do you keep this stuff?" I asked, crouching beside her. She didn't look at me right away. I don't know," she said slowly. "Some of it's just memories I can't throw away, even the ones that hurt." Her voice trembled just slightly, a whisper hidden beneath a careful mask. I leaned closer, careful not to crowd her, but drawn to the vulnerability I'd rarely seen. She pulled out a folded letter, yellowed at the edges. Her fingers lingered over it, tracing the creases, and I noticed the faint quiver in her hands. "This was from a long time ago," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "Someone I loved and lost." I swallowed, unsure what to say. The air between us was thick with something neither of us had named yet. "I didn't know," I said softly. She shook her head. "Most people don't. I don't talk about it." Her gaze met mine, brief but steady, and I felt like I was standing on the edge of something fragile. He wasn't perfect, but he was my person, and I ruined it. I wanted to reach out, but I froze, afraid of the wrong gesture, afraid of breaking her calm. Instead, I stayed quiet, letting her words sink in. Then she pulled out a small photograph. It was faded, edges curling. I recognized the place immediately, a park we'd walked past the week before, but But in the photo, the grass was brighter, the sun warmer. She held it as if it were made of glass. I can't even remember the sound of his voice most days, she said, almost to herself. Her eyes were distant, haunted, but I remember how safe I felt, how everything felt right. And then I said something stupid, left something unsaid, and he was gone. I didn't know how to respond. All I could do was nod, feeling the weight of her confession pressing against my chest, a quiet ache that had nothing to do with me, but everything to do with her. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the soft shuffle of papers, the distant hum of the city below. I wanted to tell her something, anything, but the right words didn't exist. Finally, she looked up, eyes glimmering with unshed tears, but she smiled faintly, a small, almost fragile thing. I guess I'm telling you this because I don't have anyone else to say it to. Not really. Her hand hovered over the photo, hesitant, almost protective. I noticed the subtle way her fingers lingered, how her pulse seemed to echo in her wrist. And in that silence, in that careful, fragile honesty, something seismic shifted, not in words, not in actions, but in the space between us. I realized I wasn't just a witness to her past anymore. I was a part of the quiet, trembling present she'd just shared with me. I didn't speak. I just reached out, just barely brushing my fingers against hers. A simple touch, but it felt like everything had changed. We ended up in the kitchen that evening, both of us standing by the counter under the soft glow of the pendant light. Outside, the city hummed quietly, cars passing, distant sirens, a life that kept moving even when ours had slowed into this fragile bubble. She was making tea, hands moving with deliberate care, and I leaned against the doorway, watching her. There was no rush, no tension this time, just a quiet awareness that we were both here, in the same space, and somehow, that mattered more than anything. I didn't mean to make things complicated, she said softly, not looking at me. Her fingers wrapped around the mug, warm and steady. I didn't know how to not feel everything. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I stepped closer, letting the silence do some of the talking. Her words lingered in the air, heavy and fragile, and I realized that the space between us had become something tangible, something we were both acknowledging without needing to name it. She finally looked up, eyes softer than I had ever seen them. You make it hard to pretend none of this matters, she admitted, almost a whisper. I didn't need to answer. The honesty was enough. There was no grand gesture, no dramatic declaration, just a shared understanding that whatever this was, it wasn't going away, and we didn't want it to. She moved to sit at the small table, and I followed, perching on the edge of the chair opposite her. Our knees brushed lightly, a small, accidental contact that made both of us catch our breath for just a second. It was intimate in a way that didn't need words. For a long while, we just sat there, letting the quiet stretch between us, listening to the faint tick of the clock, the soft whistle of the kettle, the occasional distant honk from the street. And in that silence, there was an unspoken acknowledgement of everything we'd felt, everything we'd risked feeling, and the understanding that somehow, we had arrived here together. She set her mug down, and, without thinking, I reached across the table. Our fingers met, a gentle, deliberate touch, no suddenness, no pressure, just the quiet confirmation that we were both willing to be here, fully present, with all the uncertainty that entailed. Her hand stayed in mine, light but steady, and I felt a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the tea. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't a fairy tale, but it was real, earned, hard-won. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. Everything that could be said had already been said in the glances, the pauses, the shared breaths, and that simple touch. Finally, she leaned back slightly, a small exhale escaping her lips, and I mirrored it, leaning back too. Our hands lingered just long enough to remind us that this wasn't the end of anything. It was a beginning, tentative, careful, and entirely ours. And in that quiet, gentle space, with nothing dramatic, nothing rushed, I realized that the truth we'd been dancing around for weeks had finally settled between us. Not shouted, not confessed in grand gestures, just acknowledged, quietly and irrevocably. I didn't need to say anything else. I'm not sure when the moment really ended. Maybe it hasn't. Some mornings, I wake up and the memory of that quiet evening in her kitchen is still with me. The soft light, the gentle touch of her hand, the way we didn't need words to understand everything. I think about her often, the way she carries herself, confident and layered, yet still capable of letting someone in if they're patient enough. And I think about me, how much quieter I've become in some ways, how much more aware of the spaces between people, the silences, the moments that matter more than anything said aloud. We didn't rush. We didn't make promises we couldn't keep. We simply existed in the same space, and that alone was enough to teach me something I didn't know I needed. That love doesn't always need grand gestures. Sometimes it's in shared glances over a coffee mug, in fingers brushing accidentally, yet deliberately, in understanding that the other person's history, their scars, their losses, are part of the same world you've chosen to enter together. She has changed too, I think. She's allowed herself to slow down, to notice the small, quiet joys without apologizing for them. She laughs more softly now, but with more sincerity. She's less guarded, or maybe she's just careful with the walls she chooses to leave standing. And somehow, she lets me be part of the space she's carved for herself. It's not perfect. It's not a story anyone would write for the movies, full of declarations or fireworks. It's grounded, messy, and real, and that makes it feel like ours. That makes it feel earned. Every pause, every hesitation, every unspoken word has led us here, to this quiet understanding that we don't need anything else to prove it. Sometimes I catch myself replaying moments. The first letter she showed me, the brush of our hands in the office, the stormy night when we couldn't pretend it was normal. Each memory carries a little weight, a little warmth, a little ache. And I carry it willingly, because it reminds me that we survived uncertainty, fear, and restraint, and that we found something worth holding on to anyway. I've learned that love isn't always loud. It's subtle. It's in the little things that could be missed if you weren't paying attention. The way she sighs when a task is done, the way I hesitate before speaking because I care how it lands, the quiet agreement that some things don't need to be explained. And maybe that's what makes it stronger. Not the confessions or the near misses, but the trust, the patience, and the slow unfolding of something that doesn't need to be forced. I take a deep breath, remembering the weight of her hand in mine that evening, and I smile. The story isn't over. It's just ours now, quiet, real, and entirely alive. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?